Hey, Trailblazers, this is your host, Jason. And as you know, one thing we care most about on the Trailblazing Texas podcast is supporting small businesses that support our outdoor community. Angry Pica Food Company is exactly that. Family-driven, community-focused, and committed to fueling adventures the right way. So please check them out. They have wonderful meals and a new product, coffee, which I've tested and it's spectacular. So give them a look at angrypicafood.com. Now on with the episode. Welcome to the Trailblazing Texas Podcast, where we embark on a journey through our diverse Texas landscapes and breathtaking trails while always engaging with our amazing Texas hiking community. So settle in, tighten up those bootlaces, and get ready for the thrilling tales awaiting for you on this episode. Welcome to the Trailblazing Texas Podcast. I'm your host, Jason, and today our guest is coming to us all the way from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Nate, welcome to the podcast.
Howdy, Jason. Howdy, listeners. Happy to be on here.
All right, so I just want to, really the first thing we need to address, and I just want to let you know that we've had guests on before, Sam from New Mexico. This is a safe space. New Mexico hikers and backpackers are definitely welcome on the Trailblazing Texas podcast. So just take a deep breath. This is, we're going to have a lot of fun.
I think the real danger for me being in New Mexico is whether New Mexico people will still like me after being on a Texas podcast. That's the real question.
Yes, because I tell you what, when they see our Texas license plates in the parking lots of some of the hiking destinations, I don't believe they are too happy.
Not all the time, no.
All right. So before we dive into everything about you and your journey, and to the listeners here in a second, you will have the opportunity to get connected and follow Nate and all the wonderful things that he does. I highly recommend it. I do warn you, though, it's like, what is that like on YouTube? The rabbit hole. You see one video and then you just keep going. You will watch his content. And then after about 6 hours, you're going to go like, oh, crap, where has the day gone? So with that warning being said, Nate, if it's possible, share with the listeners how they can connect with you, follow you, and see all the wonderful things that you're doing on trail.
Yeah, so my YouTube channel is kind of my main bread and butter of what I put out there for people to consume. That my YouTube channel is called One Man's Odyssey. And then I have other socials too. I have an Instagram that I kind of just keep focused to more hiking or outdoors related stuff. It's not, certainly I'm not an influencer or anything, but that's One Man's Odyssey YT. And I also have a Facebook page, One Man's Odyssey YT as well. I don't really post there. That's more just if you want to contact me, ask me a question or something. I post sometimes on TikTok, but pretty much if I'm posting on TikTok, I'm also posting the same thing to YouTube and Instagram. But if you want to follow me on TikTok, it's at Nate Jitsu. So like ninjitsu, but with Nate instead of nin. I think that covers it all.
All right, cool. Thanks for sharing it with the listeners. So to the listeners, we're going to be talking about New Mexico hiking, backpacking. We're going to be talking about peak bagging. We're going to get into Texas. So there's a lot that we're going to get into. But before we do, Nate, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the podcast. If you are, you know what's coming. It's almost the best segment of the podcast. I call it the lightning round. I've got some doozies for you. So are you ready?
Ready as I'll ever be.
All right. And, it's the first words that pop into your mind. But don't worry, through the magic of edit, you are going to be flying through this. And I think at the end of the day, you're going to be proud of how you did.
I appreciate your confidence in me.
I believe in you. All right. Favorite New Mexico peak?
I'll go with Sheepshead Peak.
All right. Favorite Texas trail?
South Rim.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunrise.
Trekking poles or no poles?
Yes, poles.
Desert or mountain?
Desert.
Favorite trail snack?
Summit beer.
Most underrated New Mexico hiking location?
I'll go with the Cimarron Range, kind of northeastern part of the high country, maybe around Angel Fire or Eagle Nest area.
GPS or paper map?
GPS.
What is that one peak you were the most nervous about attempting?
I have a pretty bad fear of heights, so anything having to do with heights is going to freak me out. And so I think Cabazon Peak, where I was at that time in my journey of peak bagging, that was probably one I was very nervous about. I don't think I'd be quite so nervous if I did it today, but definitely where I was then, I was very nervous about it.
If you only had time for one more adventure, what peak are you hitting?
I'll say Emery Peak.
One trail every listener should hike before they die.
I'll go with a curveball here and say the Grinnell Glacier Overlook in Glacier National Park.
What is your favorite piece of gear?
I'll give a cheeky answer and I'll say the CalTopo app on my phone.
All right. Tent or hammock?
Tent.
Trail runners or hiking boots?
I wish the answer was trail runners, but most of the time I use hiking boots.
All right. Well, I think with a lot of stuff you do, you probably need a good hiking boot.
And just past injuries, past an injury kind of leans me towards hiking boots for most things.
All right. Most overrated piece of gear?
I think hammock.
Is there a piece of gear that you currently have but you never use?
I'll say my med kit, thankfully.
All right. I love it. Favorite backpacking brand?
Osprey packs.
Camp stove or cold soak?
Definitely camp stove. I do the episode about the with the Angry Pika turned me on to the Angry Pika granola, and that was my first ever experience cold soaking, and I like that, but definitely more into using a camp stove.
What is the most luxurious item that you take on trail?
If it's a day hike, probably the Summit beer.
All right. Do you actually read gear instructions?
No.
Do you follow Leave No Trace religiously or mostly?
Mostly.
Longest you've gone without a shower?
5 days.
What is your most irrational trail fear?
Just hiking at night is spooky. No matter how much you do it, even if you got the headlamp, there's always that feeling that eyes are on you, and it doesn't matter what it is. It's not even really I'm worried about an animal, just fear.
I have some big things with the Lone Star Hiking Trail, like some really stupid goals. The reason why I haven't done it is because night hiking, because, it's big days and it's going to be at night. So I feel you. All right. Yes or no? Have you ever cried on trail?
It's a yes. For both reasons, joy and pain.
All right. Yep. I love it. Me too. Down or synthetic?
Synthetic.
Most surprising wildlife sighting?
It was surprising. I saw a brown bear once when I was hiking in the Wheeler Peak area, and it was just surprising because it kind of had a very goofy reaction when I scared it. I followed all the instructions to the T to get bears to run away from you, and this bear was pretty close to me. It was probably like 100 feet away, and it was on the trail.
Oh.
And it was big, and it was just somebody left trash on the trail, and so it was pawing on the trail to get at the trash. And so I did it. I was like, oh, this is my first bear encounter. I'm going to do all the things that they say to do, clap my hands above my head, scared it. And I remember very vividly, it like turned, looked at me, looked terrified of me, had huge wide eyes, and just barreled up the slope away from me. So it was surprising because I just was not expecting to see it there.
I would say the majority of the guests get this question correct, maybe about 80%, but there's some that get it wrong. Either way, you'll either get a sad face, a happy face with some thumbs up, depending on your answer, but we're going to keep trucking through, so don't worry too much. Best for hydration, water bottles or hydration bladders?
Water bottles, definitely.
Smile and 2 thumbs up. All right, Nate. So was it as bad as you thought it was going to be?
Through the magic of editing, it was not.
All right. Yep. You were flying. I can just feel it. When I download this and get through that edit, you might have set the record.
I think, people will be surprised that I'm answering the questions before you even ask them.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. So let's dive in. And I love this first part of the episode is really kind of to get to know you, warm the listeners up to your journey, your story, and really kind of dive into what's motivating you these days. So if you kind of step back, how did you get into hiking and backpacking?
Yeah, so I definitely did not really growing up have that be much of a part of my life. I grew up in the Chicago area, and you know, I don't know if Chicago is like the worst place in the country for outdoor stuff, but it's definitely not a great place, at least for hiking and backpacking. You're probably minimum 3 hours away from the nearest place where you could do any kind of backpacking overnight trip. Certainly no like peak bagging. There is surprisingly in Illinois, there is a long distance through hike that you can do, but it's like 6 hours away from the Chicago area. It is not a very close hike at all. So growing up, there just wasn't something that I did very much. I didn't really have a lot of friends that did any of that stuff, some in Boy Scouts. And really, I think like it was more when I was maybe in about high school, probably about 14 or 15 years old, that like I remember, I think it was two things really. One of them was my parents got like a small cottage in northwestern Michigan, in a very scenic area of northwestern Michigan. And because of that, that ended up basically becoming like all our vacations would be there. And they kept it, internet free, cable TV free. So when I was up there, there was just like nothing to do. We'd be up there for weeks at a time, during my summer breaks. There's just nothing to do except for hike. And it was kind of like that. Plus, I was a really big fan of the TV show Survivor Man with Les Stroud. Those two things combined, when I started getting older, really kind of got me into like the outdoors. And growing up, I had, we'd been on family vacations to, like, we did one road trip to the Grand Canyon, and where we drove through Texas and visited Guadalupe Mountains, visited Carlsbad Caverns. We did another road trip when I was a little younger to Rocky Mountain National Park. And so like, it wasn't like I had never experienced mountains, but I don't think after the age of like 9 or 10, we didn't really do anything like that. And so like kind of rediscovering, there are all these like beautiful places out there. There are places with like huge mountains in the US. And I started kind of falling in love with the idea of going to those places. And when I was applying for college, I basically, I applied to a lot of the schools in the Midwest, like U of I, Purdue, and basically I figured, you know what, I want to apply to a school in the Mountain West just because it would be awesome to live there and go hiking and live somewhere with mountains. And so I applied. I actually tried applying to University of Arizona and got like halfway through the process before I realized that they actually didn't offer my major for an undergraduate program. So then I like literally just picked the closest school that had my major for an undergraduate program, which was New Mexico. It was like I visited U of I and Purdue, and I didn't really like those towns. If you don't know, they're college towns. Urbana-Champaign, West Lafayette, they're college towns. There's nothing really to do there except for the college. And I really liked going to Albuquerque for that school visit because it was actually very affordable, and I thought I might want to go there. So I visited the school, really enjoyed the campus, enjoyed the city, enjoyed New Mexico. While we were on that trip, we actually took the tram up to Sandia Peak, which is like the tallest mountain that overlooks the city of Albuquerque. And I just thought, this is awesome. I really want to live here. So I ended up going to UNM, and that basically kind of began my journey of really loving mountains, loving nature, loving the outdoors. And for the first 2 years I lived in Albuquerque, I didn't have a car. So I also kind of had to make that work and sort of tack on with people's trips as I could. And so I definitely had to teach myself, and there were a lot of bumps in the road. And so, I had a lot of experiences that probably in retrospect really delayed my maximal experiences in the outdoors, because I was, it's funny because even 15 years ago, it just, the amount of resources on the internet was so much less than they are now. And so like one thing I would do is, I already mentioned Survivor Man. That's probably like my biggest influence when it comes to like wanting to make YouTube videos. I really liked, he was like, around the time, or I don't know if you remember this time when there were all these survival type shows on Discovery Channel and stuff, and Bear Grylls, Dual Survival, they were all very like heavily dramatized, and they all had camera crews, they all had film crews. And what I liked about Survivor Man is he did everything himself. And he would lightly dramatize things, but for the most part, he was filming it himself, and the experience that you were seeing was real. And what I liked about it too is where he was, the location where he was, kind of became a character in each episode. And he would always do a really great job of getting like good scenery shots. And so when I, didn't have a car my first 2 years at UNM, just sitting in my dorm room, like pining, I would go to the library and just like check out full-size Forest Service maps and make copies of them and just dream, oh, I would love to do this trip, but I don't have a car. I can't drive 6 hours down to the Gila wilderness to go on a hike.
Yeah.
And so I would watch, at the time, we're talking like 2011, 2012, the modern landscape of YouTube, where it's kind of corporatized now. Back then, it was definitely much more driven by like smaller time creators who, if it wasn't quite like it is now, where the big videos were viral videos. Now it's more of like creator based, and back then it was more small time creators. And so like there were a few channels that I really fell in love with, where they would really show their experience hiking and backpacking in New Mexico and the Southwest. Channels like the Southwest Backpacker, that was a really big inspiration for me. Some other channels that I've personally gotten to work with, like Manzana Man Adventure, these guys who maybe were part of that, like, I don't want to say old guard because it's only 10 or 15 years ago, but part of that older guard of original YouTube creators that would make this content and really just do a great job of kind of like bringing you into that place. And so as I kind of went on my journey, learning how to hike, learning how to backpack, I kind of knew like eventually that would be something I would want to do, is to somehow capture that, whether it be through writing, like blogging or something, or through video creation. So now I kind of do both, because I do I like to write up about all my trips, but I just post them on like Peak Bagger in little short blurbs. They're not like big trip reports, but on YouTube I can make the full video. So I mean, along the way, definitely I knew like I definitely wanted, backpacking was kind of my first thing that really interested me. I really liked the notion of carrying all the stuff on your back, going out in the woods and spending a few nights. I think the way that I tried to do that, what I would caution to anybody, if you're just looking into getting into hiking, just getting into backpacking, like definitely start small. That was my mistake. And I just always really wanted to do some like epic trip, some big mileage or multi-night trip. And it always blew up in my face because I didn't know what I was doing until I got much more experience under my belt, kind of went back and did the smaller trips, did the homework that I should have done instead of immediately getting into it. My first ever backpacking trip was, I came back. I spent my first summer, I did not spend in New Mexico when I was in college. I came back home, spent that summer in Chicago, and I somehow convinced like all my high school friends to go on a backpacking trip in that area of southern New Mexico. It's not southern New Mexico, southern Illinois. It's called the River to River Trail. It goes from the Ohio River to the Mississippi River. And it's right around, the area we hiked was right around this area called Garden of the Gods, not the one in Colorado Springs, a different Garden of the Gods. But basically up down there, it's kind of like the glaciers didn't make it that far south, so it's much more hilly and rocky. And the first ever trip I planned was just a total disaster, because we got there after 6 hours of driving, got there at like 11. It was mid-May, but it was just like brutally hot. It was like in the upper 90s, and that area, you're basically in the South right there. I mean, imagine you're like basically where Illinois meets Kentucky. And so it was very humid as well. And we had planned, I think, a 4-night trip. And I mean, spoiler alert, we made it out and back. We did not spend a single night in the woods. Basically, again, this is going back to like how much fewer resources there were online back then. Back then there was no CalTopo, there was no AllTrails, there was no Onyx Backcountry, all these tools that people use for trip planning. So I was just kind of going off like photocopied Forest Service maps. And I didn't know that basically the dashed blue line meant that the stream was not there all the time.
It's seasonal.
Yeah. And so we were in a drought. And so none of the planned water sources actually existed. And so we figured that out pretty quickly and kind of turned around. The other thing too was like, I've never experienced this in my life, but I have. Anytime I've ever had ticks on me, it's been like 2 or 3 ticks, maybe one. This time, I swear, every single time we would stop hiking, which was a lot because nobody was prepared. Nobody knew what we were doing. We were all overpacked. Every time we would stop, we would spend 10 minutes pulling ticks off us. There were literally dozens of ticks on us. I think for like 2 weeks after the fact, I was still finding live ticks in my car just because there were so many. And I have no idea why there were so many ticks, but it was just such a disaster of a trip. And experiences like that, I think, like the romanticism of doing a multi-day backpacking trip in this remote area is really nice, but like I should have done my homework. I should have done my legwork, practice with like an overnight 2 or 3 mile trip to get used to what that was like.
I tell you what, ticks, that's my irrational trail fear, and I would have immediately turned around.
Yeah, I'm definitely, if I, they say like if you get a tick bite, like it could take years for Lyme disease to come on. So I figure if I ever get Lyme disease, it was probably from that day. I mean, there was so many of them. I could not believe it. So then like, yeah, after I lived in New Mexico for a while, that was kind of where I did a little bit better. I still made a lot of mistakes, but just go on the one night trip. And it was a lot easier. It's a lot easier living out west to just drive an hour and go somewhere very scenic and remote versus like living in the Chicago area. I mean, you're looking at a long drive to get somewhere where you can do something cool.
So do you remember out of all your hiking and backpacking trips, that one that made you think, yeah, I've got to have more of this?
Yeah, I think probably, I was a junior in college. This would have been after I had this was like my 3rd year living in New Mexico. And I was able to, again, like, in retrospect, it's funny that I kept feeling like I needed to bring people with me because in reality, they probably actually made the whole experience worse because they were even less experienced than I was and I had 0 experience. But I was able to rope two friends of mine to come on a hike with me, and we wanted to go hike up to Lake Catherine in the Pecos Wilderness near Santa Fe. And basically, like, Lake Catherine, I would assume, is probably one of the 3 top, if not 2 top backpacking destinations in northern New Mexico. Definitely, if you like look up a list of like best places to go backpacking in New Mexico, that probably is up there. And it's a very scenic lake, not too long of a hike. But if you're over carrying your pack, it's, one of my friends on this trip, I did not tell him to do this, by the way. He brought an entire handle of rum with him. And his reasoning was he needed it to purify the water. And he was dead serious about this. He was dead serious about he was going to mix the rum with the water to purify it, which was like mind boggling to me even then. And we did not actually make it to Lake Catherine. We made it like, if any listeners have done the hike, it's basically when you're hiking up to Lake Catherine from the east, you reach this very scenic alpine pond that is definitely not Lake Catherine. And if you just hike like another 1/10 of a mile with like maybe 100 feet of elevation gain, you cannot see Lake Catherine from this pond, but you're so close to it. And we were just so exhausted that we just stopped there. And I think we kind of convinced ourselves that it was Lake Catherine, even though it definitely wasn't. And even though that trip did not go that well, it was just like growing up like in Chicago where there's no mountains, that kind of scenery just doesn't exist. It was so surreal to me to be somewhere with all these hills, these amazing canyons. And even so, fast forwarding a little bit, I went to grad school in North Carolina in Raleigh. And, I had a friend there who lived in the area and he had never been out west before. And I was trying to explain to him, like, look, some of the most beautiful canyons in North Carolina are like unnamed nothing canyons out west. And that's not to take away from the beauty of North Carolina and the beauty of the eastern states, but like everything out west is it's incredibly beautiful. So that was definitely like a very surreal experience for me of being somewhere like that. And I think because that went mostly successful and it wasn't a tick-ridden disaster, that got me inspired that definitely got me hooked. And I was like, I need to do more stuff like this.
So what about, like, you have a huge love for the mountains, and we you talked about it a second ago, that looking at the maps and really thinking how cool would this be. There's a lot of hiking and backpacking in New Mexico that maybe is not around mountains, depending on where you live. But how and when did that draw for the mountains start for you?
Yeah, I mean, so I definitely I throughout my life thought like, oh, I'm never going to be like a mountain climber or hiking to mountains or anything. And I certainly don't currently. I do not consider myself a mountain climber because I'm not the type of person that's going to put on crampons. And not that I don't want to be that. I definitely want to work my way up to that. But currently, I'm not putting on crampons and grabbing an ice axe and even scrambling. I can do scrambling, but I'm not the most confident scrambler. But I love hiking in mountains. I love peak bagging, and it's funny because I look back and growing up, I had a really bad fear of heights. Like I was the kid who would climb up to the monkey bars and would scream for my dad to come get me down. And I remember doing climbing walls, and I would make it probably 3 feet up before I would start kind of freaking out. And I think maybe when I started actually climbing peaks and realizing you're not in constant danger. I mean, obviously you need to have your wits about you. You need to be safe, but you're not, just because you're high up doesn't mean you're in immediate danger to fall to your death. That's just not the way that it works for most. And kind of as I remember, I think I want to say it was summer of 2017. I was in New Mexico for that summer. And earlier in the summer, I had done Wheeler Peak, which is the highest mountain in New Mexico. And I was basically, I was in a Facebook group I was in a Facebook group, and somebody posted in it saying, hey, I'm traveling across the country, just hiking different peaks, doing different state high points. And I'm looking for people to join me on this hike of Wheeler Peak. If you can join me, I'd love to have you. And I remembered being really nervous about it and thinking oh, I'm going to be so high up there. It's going to be so frightening. And I figured, you know what, I'll just do it. I'll go with them. And worst case scenario, I just turn around and go back. And it was just awesome. I was a little bit nervous when we got high, which is funny to think about because I was on Wheeler Peak 3 weeks ago, and I'm just thinking to myself, how in the world there's no way that you could fall and hurt yourself doing the standard route up Wheeler Peak. I mean, it's you'd have to really, really try hard to hurt yourself falling on doing Wheeler Peak, via the standard route that is. And so, even doing it, I was I got the adrenaline pumping. And then I remember for some reason on the descent, we took a different way down. So we went up the main route, which is Williams Lake. That's a very short route. Just switchbacks up the side, basically, and then you're at the summit, about 4 miles one way. The longer route, but also very scenic, is the Bull of the Woods route, which is also class 1. But there is one little side trip you can do where you, instead of kind of following the northeast ridge off Wheeler Peak down, you kind of follow the north ridge directly down. And it's kind of like a class 2 scramble, very unexposed, not difficult, but probably not really that worth it. I mean, it's not that fun of scrambling or anything. And I remember doing somehow our group decided we were going to do that. And I remember being very nervous about that, and it just went fine. And I'm oh, that was actually not too bad. And just the experience of being on top of a high alpine mountain to me was just really surreal. Being able to just see these classic views that I just assumed I would only ever see on a website or something. Just being able to see them myself, even though in retrospect, Wheeler Peak is, I would even say it's probably one of the easiest alpine summits you can do in New Mexico. That just to me was very surreal. And then I would say beyond that, I think later that summer I did Lake Peak, which is kind of in town in Santa Fe. And you're talking about irrational fears earlier. I think the thing that maybe scared me more than heights was lightning. So New Mexico, areas of West Texas, Colorado, Arizona, has a monsoon season where in summer, basically starting around usually mid-July, it's a pretty good bet that you're going to have violent thunderstorms every afternoon in the mountains. And they typically start at around like 2 p.m., but they can start as early as 10 a.m. or even 9 a.m. if you get really unlucky, or they might not have it at all. They might just be distant thunder. So, but it's always a possibility. It's very rare that it starts as early as 9 or 10 a.m. You're usually safe if you're off the mountain by noon. You're usually safe. Being below tree line by noon is better, but off the mountain by noon is a pretty safe bet, especially in New Mexico where there's not that much distance between the summit and tree line usually. And that was honestly what terrified me the most. It's like if I would see a cloud while I was hiking, I basically thought, like, okay, it's going to start storming. And now that you get enough experience and you learn to kind of read the weather and you realize, like, no, just because a cloud's in the sky doesn't mean that you're about to get struck by lightning. So yeah, later that summer, I did Lake Peak near Santa Fe, and I did that solo. I didn't do that with a group. And that was another one where and that one actually did have a little bit of scrambling. And I remember the clouds had started to build. Like basically Lake Peak, it's like you get to a sub peak called Deception Peak. And that's just a class 1 hike. There's no scrambling involved. And then to get from Deception Peak to Lake Peak, you have one of two options. You can either do a kind of, it's not the worst, but it's not the best. It's kind of a crappy hike on it's not really a real trail. It's more of just a route. And it's kind of a hike through the woods and on rocks. And it's a little bit tricky at times with a light class 2 kind of climb up the boulders to get to the summit. Or you can do a little bit more exposed class 3 ridge climb to get from Deception to Lake Peak. And I remembered, with the clouds building, I was like, oh, I'm not going to do it. I didn't do it. And then I kind of told myself, like, no, just go do it. Like, it's not going to take that long. You have definitely at least an hour before the clouds turn into anything. And I was able to get to Lake Peak, and just that feeling of like fighting my anxieties, both with the scrambling and with the thunderstorms building and the heights. That was just such an awesome experience, and being able to like just see all the mountains of the Pecos Wilderness and again, yeah, just that mountain scenery. If you didn't grow up around it and you aren't used to it, even now that I am used to it, it's just like it still just takes your breath away. It's very beautiful. I really enjoyed it. So those 2 hikes that summer, I would say basically like got me going on, okay, peaks are actually pretty fun to do. You got to start doing some peaks.
So what are some of your current goals that you have set for yourself?
So I think I mentioned it earlier, kind of like my favorite thing right now, like I would say also part of like discovering peaks and why I liked about it is like, I'd go on maybe a day hike just to nowhere in particular, just like, oh, I'm going to hike 8 miles today, just hike 4 miles. And then when I've gone 4 miles, turn around and hike back. And like, to me, hiking to peaks was like, this is a lot of fun. It feels like you've done something, like you've done this quantized thing that's a lot of fun. And then I started kind of getting more into like off-trail peaks and realizing like, oh, if you know what you're doing, you can do these off-trail peaks that don't have a trail to them. And it's actually in some sense a lot more fun than doing a trail peak. First of all, you're definitely guaranteed to see nobody. And so as I started kind of doing both on-trail and off-trail peaks, getting more used to it, I definitely realized like, okay, if I'm going to go on a hike, I want it to be to a peak. That's what I find most fun. And then, just look on all trails, and there's only so many peaks that are on all trails, right? But then you look at the map and you see, well, there's actually like hundreds of these peaks, but only hikes on all trails to a few of them. So that was when I kind of got into the website peakbagger.com. And basically what it is it's a free website to make an account. I don't get obnoxious emails or anything. I don't own the website or anything like that. So if I'm hawking it, it's just because I really like it. I'm literally on it like multiple times a day. It's very addicting to me. And it's a database that just contains peaks. It contains statistical information about the peaks, where they are, what the elevation is, what the prominence is, what the isolation is, what county they're in. And then it keeps track of all the data around these peaks. And basically you can construct lists. And it sounds silly to say it, but like doing these lists is so much fun. So like my 2 top lists right now are the New Mexico 12,000 foot peaks and the New Mexico 2,000 foot prominence peaks. And for those who don't know, prominence is kind of a measure of basically how far down you have to go before you go back up to a taller mountain. And so prominence and elevation, I would say, are kind of correlated, but not really. Like um, the most prominent peak in the contiguous U.S. is Mount Rainier, even though it's not the tallest peak, because it's basically sea level at its at its base, whereas Mount Whitney, it's kind of like 2,000 feet of elevation until you get to higher mountains in Mexico. So, and then even, more than that, like the most prominent peak in New Mexico that maybe if you're in Texas, you're familiar with is Sierra Blanca Peak, which isn't even 12,000 feet. I mean, it's close, but it's not 12,000 feet. And that's the most prominent peak in New Mexico. So prominence, I would say, is pretty, like, assuming that there's no trees at the summit, prominence is a pretty good indicator of good views and also of a good workout. Like if a peak has 1,000 feet of prominence, you usually have to work a little bit to get to it. You're probably looking at least 1,000 feet of elevation gain, unless there's a road that goes really high up to the summit. So that's just kind of my goals right now. Like I definitely would like to finish the 2,000 foot prominence and the 12,000 foot elevation peaks, but in New Mexico, but there are really big impediments to that we can get into a little bit, mostly having to do with private, tribal, and military land. And I'm not above stealth hiking, but stealth hiking on military property is maybe where I draw the line.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny you talk about prominence. If I want to get a shirt and I want to say Walters Peak is the second highest peak in New Mexico, but it's right next to Wheelers. It's on the way, but because of the prominence, it's not considered a peak. And I believe that it's taller than what's officially the second highest peak in New Mexico. I don't remember off the top of my head what it is, but I'm a Walters Peak fan, so, but because of the prominence, it's not considered.
Yeah. And probably like the most famous peak bagging list that people are familiar with is the Colorado 14ers. And, I kind of have just started hiking through 14ers now that I'm done with the almost done with the 12,000 foot peaks in New Mexico. And now that my kids are a little bit older and it's a little bit easier to steal away like a weekend, I've been kind of knocking out 14ers as I can. And I haven't done very many. I've only done like 7. And they, there's a big thing with the 14ers of like, is it 53 or 58? Because depending on what your prominence cutoff is, it could be 58, it could be 53, or it could be somewhere in between those. So, yeah, I mean, like, prominence is useful for like determining whether or not something should be considered a peak or just like a knob connected to a peak. But then, yeah, like I said, I think it's really like if you're on a 2,000 foot prominence peak, you usually have a really awesome view, assuming you're above the trees, which is not always the case in New Mexico. It's also a lot of fun too, because like all the 12,000 foot peaks in New Mexico are all in the Sangre de Cristos, which is basically between Santa Fe and then like to the Colorado state line in a very relatively thin band. So while doing all those peaks is fun because you do get to explore different areas of the Sangres, like doing the prominence peaks really gets you to like way different places. And New Mexico is a pretty diverse state in terms of like the terrain and the different life zones and climates. And so it's cool to me that like, you do one 2,000 foot prominence peak and you'll be literally like in the desert. And then you could do another one and you're on like a 13er. And and you could, I mean, if you really wanted to, you could do it both in the same day. And I think that's pretty cool.
So how many 12,000 foot peaks have you completed and how many are there in New Mexico?
So if you adhere to the 300 foot cutoff, and for the 12,000 foot peaks, there are 35 of them if you adhere to that 300 foot prominence cutoff. So you're like talking like somewhat in the range of like 14ers, right? They're, let's say 53 14ers following a similar cutoff. So you're at same order of magnitude roughly. And the caveat to that is that of those 35 peaks, 3 of them are on Taos Pueblo land, and they do not allow visitors. And 4 of them are on private land. One of them, I would say one of them is effectively on public land. There's really nothing stopping you from hiking it. And the other 3 are like way far deep. Like you could do it. People have done it. And I won't say whether or not I plan on doing it, but There are 3 peaks that are at Ted Turner's ranch, Vermejo Park Ranch, and it's a pretty bulky hike. Like you could do the furthest south one, Big Costilla Peak, I think pretty reasonably as a day hike. But if you're going to hit all 3 of them, you're talking a long day. You're talking, I think, 23 miles and like 7,000 feet of vert, all off trail. Like doing that on trail is no small feat, but doing it off trail because you're on a ridge, there's no water sources either. So you got to haul all your water as well, or cache or something, or hope that there's a snow field that you can melt. But then you're carrying a stove, and it's like, well, is it even worth it at that point? Just cache. And so, like, even if you wanted to stealth hike those, it's a big undertaking. And so I've done 28 of them. So the only one I haven't done yet is North Truchas Peak, the only one on public land, I should say. And that's just because it's a long day hike or an overnight hike. It's just a long hike. And I did attempt it once. There's a scrambling route that's a little bit more manageable as a day hike, but I have a video of this. Like most of the hikes I'm going to talk about now, I probably have videos of them, but it basically was like no wind at all that day in the forecast. I think when I checked the peak, Truchas Peak, it was like 8 miles an hour wind, and I got to the ridge to do the scramble, and it was like knocking me down. It was so strong wind, and I have never experienced any kind of forecast that was so out of line with what the predicted forecast was. And it's like you could watch the video and you can see like it's so loud, like it's blowing out the gain of my camera microphone. It's just like it's amazing that it was so windy on that day. But so I'm hoping, knock on wood, in the next couple weeks I might bag North Truchas, and then I don't know what I'll do.
So if you look back at all the peaks that you've done, which one surprised you the most?
So definitely when it comes to the 12,000 foot peaks in New Mexico versus the Colorado 14ers, like there are no standard routes that are class 4. And there are very few standard routes that require any kind of scrambling, and maybe only a handful that require class 3. So I don't think there weren't really any that surprised me with the scrambles. I would say like what I was most surprised of was maybe when I did Baldy Mountain, which is basically like northeast of Angel Fire area. That I just thought the views from up there were so beautiful, and it's a funny peak because if you don't know, Baldy Mountain is the highest peak on the Philmont Scout Ranch, and because of that, it's not open to the public. So I did stealth hike in from the south. You can hike over Touch Me Not Mountain, which is on state park land. And if you just keep going north, you get to Baldy Mountain, and there's no fences or anything. So I'm not necessarily recommending that people do that, but that's what I did. And that's what a lot of people do.
Well, you just got lost and you're like, what the heck?
Oh, actually, it was funny because the trip report, I think before mine on Peak Bagger, the hiker mentioned something about hunting season because it's a state park. There's some like it's unclear reading the signage whether you're actually allowed to access the state park. I guess it's a state wildlife area. It's unclear whether you're allowed to access the state wildlife area during hunting season. And I was going during hunting season, and I didn't even think about it. And so I'm hiking, and I'm probably well on private land at this point, and I hear an elk. And so I'm thinking, oh, this is very beautiful early fall. I'm going to bugle back at the elk and see if I can see an elk. And then I'm hiking after like 5 minutes, and I hear, it's a guy. And there is like a grandpa maybe, and like grandson and granddaughter maybe. But they were older. They were like teenagers. And they were just like completely aghast that somebody was out there. And they were looking at me like I was an alien. Like, how in the world, what are you doing here? How did you get out here? And I was extremely apologetic because I'm like, you know what? I'm actually probably like, I'm trespassing probably. And I'm ruining your hunting trip that, you may have paid a lot of money for. So I was very apologetic, but going up to Baldy Mountain after that, it was just like, a lot of the peaks are kind of clustered in these little groups. You've got like the cluster around Santa Fe, you've got the cluster around Taos, you've got the cluster more like by Red River, and then like a cluster up by kind of more like by Cuesta. And this is kind of in the Cimarron range, the peaks are so much more spread apart. And so you kind of end up just in like this beautiful, almost like a sky island. But you're normally when you hear the phrase sky island, you're thinking like desert ranges. And this was, to me, it was more like you're on this tall, I've hiked Pikes Peak earlier in the summer. And to me, it was reminiscent of that almost. I mean, obviously Pikes Peak is much taller, much more grand. But just this experience of being like, you can just see the sea of green around you and you can see so much of the state. And it was just, I thought it was extremely beautiful. And I felt grateful too, because obviously, like I said, most people don't really get to go up there. It's kind of mostly Boy Scouts. So as being just a member of the general public, it felt like a real privilege to be up there and to just experience the beauty, because it's a really special peak. And I can, my understanding, I've talked to scouts who have gone to Philmont, and like they all say like Baldy Mountain is just beautiful and it's amazing and it's worth, and so I can say like it definitely is amazing.
So which one of the peaks that you've done has been harder than expected?
I would say like Schruch's Peak, which is the second highest mountain in New Mexico with the prominence cutoff. It's an easy peak technically. It requires kind of sustained class 2 scrambling, not really exposed in terms of fall danger anyway, but you are above tree line. And because you're above tree line so much, and because it's a pretty long hike to get into from the nearest trailhead, most people do it as an overnight backpack. It just eluded me for so long. I think I attempted it. It was my 5th time before I finally was able to summit it. I have a video of that I did with Cameron, and it was harder. Like the actual climb wasn't harder than I expected. It was just more the fact that it took me 5 times to summit the peak that I was like, it shouldn't be taking me this long, but it was most of the time it was just weather would get in the way. It would be like really high winds or a surprise early monsoon storm would roll in. And that's kind of the risk that you run when you're doing those like really remote peaks that require a night of camping to hit, is that weather will likely there's a good chance weather, especially during monsoon season, will throw a wrench in your plans.
So have you ever had any of these peaks humble you? I get humbled all the time in the quads.
I mean, Schruch's Peak, I would say definitely I felt humbled by it. I mean, there were a lot of moments where, I did one hike that I even made a video of it and I just didn't post it because I was kind of disappointed in myself, where it was like I was saying, I have been really afraid of heights. I've been trying to cure myself of that. And like, I thought I was at a point where I wasn't going to be so afraid of heights. And then it definitely affected me. I think it was partially the wind, because this was a day where it was like super windy and I got right to the base and I just like didn't feel comfortable doing it. In retrospect, I probably would have done it, but in the moment I didn't feel comfortable doing it. And that definitely humbled me and made me feel like, because earlier in the summer, like a month before, I did the Wheeler Peak Cirque with a couple friends, and like the Wheeler Peak Cirque, I wouldn't say it's the most exposed ridge in New Mexico, at least in the high country, but it's probably top 3 and probably the most sustained long distance ridge scramble in the state. So I did that like a month earlier with some friends, and like I was doing the whole like walking up the ridge with a 300-foot drop 2 feet to your right, climbing up a ridge, and I felt like Superman. And then to like do Schruch's Peak and feel like scared of heights with something that I would not really consider a very technical or exposed scramble, that definitely humbled me in that moment. Yeah, I would say that one.
So which one of your summits have given you the biggest sense of accomplishment?
Sheepshead Peak, that was the one I mentioned earlier about kind of like probably my favorite summit. It's just a really beautiful peak. It's a very interesting peak because from a distance, it's not really like, it doesn't really present itself very well. It doesn't have a very recognizable profile from a distance. But when you're there, you're like, this thing is imposing. It's narrow. It's kind of exposed depending on which way you come up. And it does require some scrambling. And I think that one, I was coming off in 2023, I had a very bad ankle injury that basically sidelined me for the entire summer and then took probably 5-6 months to get even to what I would consider like decent hiking shape. And then it was even like a year on, it was still bothering me quite a bit. And so Sheep's Head was one where like it kind of had everything. It has kind of a long approach. You've got to kind of hike in like 7 miles to the Trompas Lakes. And then to get from the lakes to the ridge is kind of an involved, sustained class 2 scramble on some kind of just crappy terrain. It's not really particularly dangerous, but it definitely, you have to take your time. And then the hike up, the final scramble, it was like kind of my first experience since recovering from my injury where I was sort of faced with like really high exposure. And I would say like, it's not that exposed, but definitely because that was my first experience back from it, it was definitely affecting me and making me very uncomfortable. And I kind of was able to seal myself and continue up, and it all went well and it went great. And to me, that was a great accomplishment. It felt like a great accomplishment after coming back from the injury. And actually, what the thing that made it really great was like I got up there from the southeast, and the other route up is pretty much non-technical. It's from the northwest. And so like I got up to the summit after seeing nobody except for campers at Trompas Lake for the whole day. And like when I get up there, like 100 feet down is somebody coming up from the other side. So I talked with him, and he was actually a viewer of the channel. And so that was pretty awesome to like people who introduce themselves and say, oh, it hasn't been that many. I think it's been 5 at last count. They're always very nice. And so it was like after accomplishing all that, kind of, it felt like all my recovery for the last year kind of like manifested in that peak, and all my insecurities and anxieties manifested in doing that peak. And then at the summit, seeing a viewer who had like nothing but nice things to say about the channel was like, it just really made me feel good.
That's a wonderful feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
It puts all the effort into hours and hours of editing and stuff. It makes it all worth it.
Well, and then I would say like probably, I think of the 5 people who have come up and said hi, I think they've all basically said some variation of what that they've experienced, what basically I think I try to give with the channel, which is like I try to show people not just the side of New Mexico, but in everything I do, the side of something that maybe you wouldn't get from most channels or from most creators who would maybe share this experience, either because they're not even there or just because they would maybe interpret it differently. And so I think about just everybody who's come up to me and said something has said basically like, oh, we like that you showed us how to level up hiking in New Mexico or level up with the trails that we want to do or do these lesser known peaks or lesser known areas. And so that the fact that was kind of the response to made me feel pretty good.
So if someone's coming into New Mexico, and it maybe doesn't have to be a 12,000-foot peak, what are some of the peaks that you think are musts for someone to tackle?
That's a really good question. I really like Sierra Blanca Peak. If you're coming from Texas, that's probably, I'm sure a lot of people come from Texas and go to Ruidoso, Cloudcroft. Sierra Blanca Peak is really awesome. There's a lot of caveats there. It's not entirely clear that it's legal to hike the peak. I have a whole diatribe prepared for explaining why I think it's okay to hike the peak, but I will not go through all that right now and say it's kind of something you have to make up your own mind if you want to do. But that's a super awesome peak. But it is obviously on tribal land. So it's like, in my mind, if I ever accidentally find myself on tribal or private land, it's like, that's when I am the religious leave no trace person. And it's like, I'm not even nominally an owner of this land. So like, I definitely can't screw this up. And so if somebody wants to do Sierra Blanca Peak, join the hundreds of other people, thousands of other people who have summited the peak with no issue and didn't need a permit and didn't see no trespassing signs. And actually, there are mountain bike trails that are on Mescalero Apache property that get within like 300 yards of the peak. So To me, it's not obvious that you're not supposed to go hike the peak, but again, people can make that decision for themselves. Sierra Blanca Peak was really cool. I would say like if you're kind of more into intense stuff, off trail stuff, scrambling, fighting thorny plants and tough terrain, one peak that's right off I-25 isn't, and I did it 6 years ago now, but I don't imagine the road is in much worse shape than it was then, and it was in pretty good shape then. We made it in like a Subaru crossover sedan with no issues. Is a Ladrone Peak. Technically, it's Ladrone's benchmark because Ladrone Peak is like a sub peak, but it's not the highest in the range. But Ladrone Peak near Socorro is like a super awesome Sky Island peak. It's like, a lot of New Mexico is kind of this high 8 to 10,000, 8 to 11,000 foot range when you're kind of in the southern part of the state. But this is like a jagged, awesome desert peak, like something you'd see in Arizona or West Texas. It's a pretty cool peak. And it's definitely, that's a really cool one that not a ton of people do. And it's right off I-25. So it's like if you're driving through New Mexico and you got 8 hours to kill, 9 hours to kill, maybe give it a shot. But again, yeah, that's scrambling, thorny plants, like know what you're getting into before you do that. One peak that I think is like, I never hear people talk about, which is weird to me. And I'll say like, I'll preface this by saying like, I am generally not super into gatekeeping. I'm not going to sit there and like not tell people about a location unless it's really like culturally sensitive or historically sensitive, where like if people visiting it would damage that aspect to it. Generally in New Mexico, I think like places actually need more visitation because the trails are completely unmaintained because nobody ever goes to them. And so if more people visited some of these more obscure peaks, like they'd probably get more maintenance and it would be more fun to hike them. But Touch Me Not Mountain, which is kind of like when I did Baldy Mountain, you have to go over Touch Me Not Mountain and then go back over it. But if you don't want to go to Baldy Mountain, like Touch Me Not Mountain basically takes you 95% of the way in terms of the view. And that's like, given that it's so close to like Angel Fire, I don't really understand how it gets such little visitation. I think maybe what it is it's a kind of sketchy road to get up to the top. It's not terribly technical, but it's definitely like rocky and bumpy, and there's not a lot of wiggle room between you and a big drop. And I think that's kind of what keeps people from hiking it much. But it's like probably without a doubt the easiest 12,000 foot peak you can climb in New Mexico. It's like maybe 1,000 feet of elevation gain or 1,500 feet of elevation gain from the trailhead. There is an actual trail. And as far as I know, like nobody, I'm in all kinds of hiking groups and stuff, and like nobody posts about it. It's a pretty little known peak. I think people are under the impression that it's private land, but it's definitely state land.
We used to always go to Angel Fire and to go skiing. And I had one bad crash and I got to the age where I don't really enjoy skiing anymore. And so when the kids and the wife go skiing, I was in Angel Fire just looking for hikes. There was a couple right in Angel Fire that were pretty neat, at least get me out for a couple of hours. But yeah, man, I wish I would have known you back then.
Yeah, and I hate that like the different evolutions that my channel has gone through. I wasn't really filming like day hikes at that point. So I actually did do that hike after I started filming for the channel and stuff, but I didn't really actually film it. I filmed a beer review on the summit, but that obviously that probably doesn't even show up in any algorithms or anything like that. So
yeah, but no, that was something that I really started to get into, is trying to find trails around Angel Fire that I could hike with, the gear that I had. I didn't have snowshoes, or I didn't bring crampons with me. I had micro spikes and a day pack, and that was about it. But yeah, I found a few, and it was a lot of fun. So that was pretty cool. I think for me, one of the most important questions, it's really neat to see someone that hikes and backpacks, their process on going and planning out a new peak or a new trail, and especially the stuff that you do, which I think a lot of it is really off trail, and it's just there's a mountain way out in the desert maybe, or and how do you go about So, I think we all can go about planning. I think that's just logically, you would want to do the research and stuff leading up to just saying, like kind of, I've done enough research to kind of know the hazards and I think it's in my wheelhouse. Let's go. So like, what is that whole process from the start to you say, yeah, I think I can get this one? And that wraps up another exciting episode of the Trailblazing Texas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the episode today and stay tuned for our next episode where we will pick back up where we left off and guarantee to uncover many more hiking gems and share many more tips to enhance your experience on the trail. Until then, happy trails and happy hiking.